Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. I was on Facebook the other day, and I was looking at this Second Coming group that I'm a part of, and somebody noted something really interesting, and I can't believe that I missed this. There are actually two things. The first thing has to do with President Oaks and when he became president of the church. So if we go back to this newsroom article, you'll remember that he became president of the church on October 14th, 2025. Exactly 2 years before this date, there was something that I think was pretty significant that happened, of all places, in Utah. Do you remember what it is? Let's go to my Second Coming timeline spreadsheet. It will go back to, let's go back to October 7th, 2023. There was an interesting series of events that centered on this date, it seems. 7 days before October 7th that year was the Saturday of General Conference. Okay, so General Conference began. 7 days later, that's when the Israel-Hamas war began, which is already it's pretty interesting. It just so happens, by the way, that the artwork that was used for that General Conference was this. This is the artwork of the Second Coming that was chosen for the announcement of the new First Presidency. They're in the conference center, and here it is right here. You have that same artwork behind the speaker, in this case, President Oaks in this picture. So, General Conference starts. 7 days later, the war begins. 7 days after that, October 14th of 2023, there was a annular solar eclipse that went through Utah. It's been a while since we've talked about this. Okay, so this is the path of the eclipse. This is timeanddate.com. And back then, it won't let me zoom in. That's okay. Back then, as I was making videos for this channel, I thought, wow, that is really interesting. The timing is interesting. And I wanted to look closer at exactly where this path of annularity went through in Utah. And to my surprise, and we'll have to go to an old video, I would pull up Google Earth, but since that time I've gotten a new computer, and I just tried to bring all this data over from my old computer to this new computer, but it didn't work. For some reason, the KMZ files they're not working, so I'll have to figure that out soon. But what you're looking at here is my other Google Earth account. And all these place markers here, it doesn't matter if it's white, green, or blue, these all represent temples. At the time that I made this video, the white were the temples that were in operation. I made this on September 17th, 2024. And I can't remember. I think green meant announced, blue under construction. But what I want you to focus on is the fact that the path of annularity, and I got this from NASA. Okay, you can download the KMZ file and put it into Google Earth. The path of annularity went through the one path that it could through Utah to miss the maximum number of temples. And I want to point out this white place marker right here is the Manti, Utah temple. At the time that the eclipse happened, it was not in operation. They were renovating it. The green one is the Ephraim, Utah temple, which still is not complete. And so the only temple that was in the path of annularity was the Monticello, Utah temple in southeastern Utah. I'm no mathematician, but I feel like the odds of this happening are very unlikely. For any given solar eclipse with a path of annularity or totality, depending on the eclipse, you're most likely going to hit a number of temples if the path goes through Utah, don't you think? So I feel like this is very unlikely. I feel like it means something. General Conference, 7 days later, this significant war begins. 7 days after that, a solar eclipse and its path of annularity goes through the state of Utah and misses the maximum number of temples. Exactly 2 years later, President Oaks becomes president of the church. And the artwork that they chose to make this announcement was the same artwork used for that general conference. I mean, come on now. Come on. Not only that, it's not just me. It's not just members of the church that felt like this eclipse meant something. I did a video about this, but we're going to review this article really quick. This is Israel 365 News. This article is from October 18th of 2023. The title is The Solar Eclipse and the Attack on Israel, written by my friend, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. It's been a while since I've talked to him. I did see that he put out a new video about the red heifers. That's probably going to be one of my next videos. There's something interesting, I guess, that's going on with that. But we'll do that in another video. Let me just show you what I highlighted. Zoom in. Okay. He notes, astronomical phenomena are often discussed in Jewish literature as accompanying the Messiah. Rabbi Yosef Berger emphasized that as horrific as the attack was, it was undeniable. That's probably supposed to be undeniably a precursor to redemption. So in Judaism, what that means, it's basically referring to the millennium, what they call the Messianic era, when the Messiah appears, which of course we know it'll be the second coming. And they refer to that period as the final redemption, or Gula. Okay. So he's talking about the millennium. Quote, what they did to the children of Israel is horrible, and they'll be judged by Hashem, which means like the name. Literally it means the name, but it's like the Lord. Of course, Rabbi Berger said. But the other nations will be judged by how they react, whether they call evil for what it is, or whether they confuse light and darkness by condemning Israel. The eclipse should have been a reminder that ultimate power lies with the armies of God, which are the forces of nature. When he brings judgment, there is no hiding from him or fighting against him. So many know this, but try to deny it. They think they can control nature. They can stop the sun getting hotter or cooler. The solar eclipse, the moon blocking out the sun, was a reminder that tiny Israel, and by the way, we could take his words and possibly apply it to ourselves, being scattered Israel, the restored church in this last dispensation. The solar eclipse, the moon blocking out the sun, was a reminder that tiny Israel, or the church, like the gentle moon, will overcome the nations that appear to be powerful, who are dominated by the sun. So this is kind of interesting as we think about President Oaks, who had a profession as a judge, and he was in law. And I tend to think that on top of the symbolism of President Nelson being the heart surgeon and making us of one heart and one mind and pure in heart, a Zion people, and President Oaks being the judge, well, I tend to think that President Oaks, if he is the prophet at the time of the second coming, he may help with implementing the political kingdom of God in transitioning from the world that we're in right now with all these nations, with all their laws, and transitioning it to the political kingdom of Christ, Messiah. He will be king during this period. It truly will be the Messianic era. So, okay. Let's see. Like the gentle moon will overcome the nations that appear to be powerful, who are dominated by the sun. The Messiah from the house of David is like the moon, which is hidden, but suddenly appears. Right? Isn't that something that we know about the second coming? We have all these different parables, for example, that he's going to come at a time that we think not. Or you think of the 10 virgins, 5 were ready, 5 were not. They knew that the bridegroom was coming. They knew the approximate time, but just suddenly he came, and there were those that were unprepared and those that were. So this is kind of interesting, looking at this from a Jewish point of view, comparing an eclipse to the Messiah. Again, we're talking about this eclipse specifically, that happened exactly 2 years before President Oaks became president of the church. Like the moon, which is hidden, but suddenly appears on Rosh Chodesh, which I believe that means head of the month, I think, like the first of the month. The Mashiach is in the world waiting to be revealed, Rabbi Berger said. Now, I like this right here a lot. It's like turning down the lights in a theater before the final act of the play begins. So, is this what happened? You know, in a sense, we're looking at Utah, where the church is currently headquartered. You could say the main body of the church, or the highest concentration of members of the church, are in Utah. And there was a turning down of the lights, but not on the temples. Not on the temples, but really close to home, right? And then exactly 2 years later, President Oaks, I got to make that transition, unfortunately, but also fortunately. 2 years later, exactly, we get President Oaks as president of the church. So interesting. It's like turning down the lights in the theater before the final act of the play begins. Rabbi Berger noted that the timing of the events was significant. I'm going to skip these next couple paragraphs. Quote, "The sages teach that before any growth, there has to be a contraction. Before a seed sprouts, the fruit must die and rot. This is especially true just before the Gula, or final redemption." It's kind of interesting because we've had a lot of unfortunate things take place in September and also October. I'm not going to rehash that, but you know what I'm talking about. There were really unfortunate things. Is it following this pattern? The fruit dying, rotting, but after that you have growth. And especially as right now, the church is growing at its fastest rate in church history. Okay, continuing. Before the resurrection of the dead must come horrible things such as the war of Gog and Magog. So many focus on the arrival of the U.S. president and the U.S. Navy in Israel. So, this is what was going on at the time that this article was written. This was shortly after the war started. People are so confused that they are focusing on war. The United States sent their Navy in order to prevent a war. How do you stop a war with weapons? Rabbi Berger asked rhetorically. It's like putting out a fire with gasoline. Mashiach will bring global peace, not through weapons, but through words of Torah from Zion. What people should be doing is praying for mercy, for kindness. They should be seeking leaders who know peace, who know Torah. I guess another way you could say that is being peacemakers, like what President Nelson told us to be. Be peacemakers. And of course, when Christ comes, there's going to be the destruction of the wicked, but those that remain, they will be listening to the Messiah and learning from him and learning Torah and all the other scriptures and living in a peaceful way. Yeah. So, now, does any of this matter? Are we just looking too much into things? Well, let's remember what else happened within like a 7-year period of time. Let's skip forward on my video. Let's see, I gotta find the right spot. Man, this would be a lot easier if I just had Google Earth. Okay, you can't see it too well, but do you remember the year 2017? There was a total solar eclipse that went from coast to coast. And guess what? The path of totality went over Adam Yaman, Far West, and Independence, Missouri, the site of the New Jerusalem. Of that eclipse, Elder Gary E. Stevenson spoke in the October 2017 General Conference, so the very next General Conference, in a talk called Spiritual Eclipse. This is in General Conference. Look what he points out. On August 21st, which 21 is 3 times 7, of this year, 2 rare events occurred that captured the attention of people around the world. I have that highlighted because that's the point of a sign. It's not supposed to be a magic trick. It's not supposed to entertain you, although it can be entertaining. It's meant to get your attention and to communicate a message. And it doesn't matter if it's something that's happening in the sky, or a song that comes on the radio, or something that a friend of yours says. The point is, it's a way for the Lord to communicate something to you. And in this case, like Elder Stevenson points out, there's these 2 things that captured the attention of people around the world. He continues, the first was the 90th birthday celebration of our beloved prophet, President Thomas S. Monson. On his 90th birthday. That's so interesting, because we're about to talk about the second thing that I wanted to point out in this video. So right now we're talking about President Oaks and becoming president of the church 2 years after the eclipse. But then we're going to talk about President Nelson and his recent birthday, and also the day that he passed away, and also the day that he was of his funeral. Okay, the first was the 90th birthday celebration of our beloved prophet, President Thomas S. Monson. The other rare and heavenly event occurring on the same day and captivating millions worldwide was a total solar eclipse. This was the first time such an eclipse had marched across the entire United States in 99 years. So if Elder Stevenson, who is an apostle, thinks that it's significant, then so do I. But especially given the fact that the path of totality went over this very, very significant location here in Northwest Missouri, or these locations, Adamonte-Yaman, Far West, and Independence, Missouri. And then let's just, finish off this idea. In 2024, and I was there to witness this, I was at the Kirtland Temple, which just the month before was purchased by the church. So, and this was the day after General Conference, by the way. So the Kirtland Temple, the first temple of this dispensation that had just been purchased by the church the month before, and the day after General Conference, the path of totality of that eclipse went over the Kirtland Temple. I have this video here. I documented it. You can watch this if you'd like. I'll put the link for this in the description box below, but it was incredible. This was probably the most Pentecostal-like experience that I've ever had in my life. This was one of my favorite day of my life. Well, it's up there. It's at least in the top 5, maybe the top 3. It was incredible. So this eclipse went over the Kirtland Temple, but not just that. It also went over the Sacred Grove. And there was a youth devotional that was recorded from there with Emily Bell Freeman and President, oh my gosh, I always read his quotes, but I can't remember his name. But the president of the Young Men, they were there. They recorded some stuff for a future devotional. Yeah, that's how it played out. So we have these 3 eclipses, and all of them went over these significant church sites. It just really stands out. And you guys, before anyone types it, I know the whole thing with, like, when you put all these together, it looks like the letter Aleph, not in the modern Hebrew script, but in Paleo Hebrew or Phoenician. Some people are like, oh, it's like Aleph over America, and then there's an Omega, Tav, which is Omega. Omega's the Greek letter. Tav is like the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Tav over the Middle East and the 30s or the 40s or something like that. People also point out the Salems that are in the path of totality of the 2017 eclipse, which anyway, and also the Ninevehs. But the thing about it is that the claim was made that there were 7 Salems in that first eclipse, and it's actually not true. They weren't there were like 4 of them, maybe 5 that were actually in the path of totality. The other ones were only kind of close. You had all these other Christians that, knew that something was going on. And so some of them, I feel like they kind of tried to shoehorn significance by saying, oh, there's 7 towns named Salem, which means peace. And that's what Jerusalem was called before it became Jerusalem. And that's fine. Yeah, maybe that's significant. The Ninevehs was a much looser connection. There were even less Ninevehs in the 2024 eclipse. So I know about Little Egypt right here where the eclipses intersect. That stuff is great. But because I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and because these eclipses are so specific to our church and our church sites, that's what I choose to focus on. I feel like this is a church-specific sign, and there are other groups that also realize something significant has happened. Okay, so let's do this now. Let's go over here. So let's scroll up to present, and I've made some updates. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So in the Facebook group, the post that I was reading pointed out that you have President Oaks becoming president of the church exactly 2 years after that eclipse that went through Utah. I also want to note, and I've mentioned this before, that it's interesting that he became president of the church on the 14th. We know that 7 is a significant number. It shows up all the time in scriptures as well as in modern times. You think about multiples of 7. I start to think about that with Joseph Smith. He was 14 years old when he had the first vision. Well, President Oaks became president of the church on the 14th of October, and his predecessor, who was called out as an apostle at the same time as him back in 1984, both of them became presidents of the church on the 14th of the month. I feel like that's unusual. So this is the first thing, President Oaks and the 2 years between him becoming president of the church and the eclipse. And then also, as we've already noted, but I just want to point this out, we have President Nelson who had his funeral on the 2-year anniversary of when the Israel-Hamas war began. So President Oaks becoming president, you have the eclipse that happened 7 days after the war began. You have President Nelson who had his funeral on the 2-year anniversary of when the war began. And as of that day, he had been president of the church, this is from January 14th, 2018 until September 27th of 2025. It was 2,813 days. If you divide that by 365, you come up with 7.7 years. That's how long he was president of the church. 7.7 years. If we go back to his birthday on September 9th, 2025, there were unusual things that happened on that day and after that day, but I want to focus on this one because it goes with what we're talking about in this video. On his birthday, you had the Israeli strike on Qatar, which from what I've read, that's essentially what has brought about this ceasefire and potentially the end of the war. It's still uncertain at this point if the ceasefire is going to remain in effect. There's been some back and forth from what I've seen. So I'm not sure that we can say that the war is over yet, for sure. But whatever the case, the ceasefire did take effect, at least for a certain period of time. The last of the living hostages were released. And it seems like the key event that led to that was what happened on President Nelson's birthday. His birthday, and then the day of his funeral, the 2-year anniversary of the war. So, and then the day that he passed away was 7 days before General Conference. We just talked about 2023. General Conference, 7 days later, the war starts. 7 days later, the eclipse in Utah. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what it all means, but just like what President Holland said in his most recent talk, he was talking about the way that the Lord works in our lives. We don't always know what's going on or what it means, but we can be aware that something is happening and that there's a divine plan. And at some point, we will know what it all means. I don't know if it's going to be in this life or the next, but at the very least, I think we can safely say something is happening. Something is happening at this very important time where you have this transition between two presidents of the church. And not just any two presidents of the church, but two that became apostles at the same time. The first one focusing very heavily on the second coming. His last two talks were, first you had his big second coming talk, and then his last one was about confidence in the presence of God. How to have confidence in the presence of God, which would apply both to the second coming as well as if you pass away. And that's what happened. He passed away. That was his last talk. There's just too much. You can't, I'm sorry, you can't call it all coincidence. You can't call it all coincidence. And then during this general conference, during the apostolic interregnum, there was a 100-year storm in Utah that brought flooding to both Tooele and Salt Lake City. And that's how President Nelson and President Oaks' apostleship began. Shortly before they became apostles in 1984, a few months earlier, in 1983, there was this unusual flooding in downtown Salt Lake. And State Street became a river because they had to divert the flow with sandbags and stuff. You can't make this stuff up. The ceasefire on the 10th, and then the last remaining hostages were returned on the 13th, the day before President Oaks becomes president of the church. I don't know what to tell you. And then, man, I don't want to go over all this. I was just going to point out, I have this spreadsheet called Signs, Moon. So this has to do with a few different things. You have solar eclipses, which of course involves the moon. You have supermoons, lunar eclipses, blue moons, and then there's I think I have a few other lunar events. Well, no, I guess they all fall under one of those categories. I have President Monson's 90th birthday total solar eclipse right here. I guess I just want to point this one thing out. So President Nelson, he becomes president of the church January 14th, 2018. 17 days later, and remember, he was the 17th president of the church, you had they call it a super blue blood moon, which is very rare when you have all three of those things coincide. The last time that happened was 1866, and that was during the Pioneer Trek West. Okay, that's how his presidency started. And then there's a bunch of other stuff, but I don't want the video to go too long, but feel free to pause, read it. You can also access my spreadsheets. The link is in the description box of each video. There's been a lot of stuff that has happened recently when it comes to the moon and the president of the church. It's undeniable. It's undeniable. You can say it's coincidence, but there sure is a lot of coincidence. I'll just say that. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.